Well, it's a very good afternoon to you. It's some for you, it's a good evening, and for some, it's a good morning, wherever you are listening to this podcast, either live or on your favorite streaming service. Welcome to the Coaching Cafe. My name is Natalie Ashdown. I'm joined by our resident HR specialist, Paula Jones Hunt. And today we are talking about shifting underperformance, using coaching to shift underperformance. As always, before we begin, we acknowledge the traditional owners and the custodians on the lands on which we all meet today, and their continuing connection to the land, the waters, and the communities of Australia, and the lands from all around the world, wherever you might be joining us today. We pay our respects to them and their elders past, present, and emerging, and elders from Indigenous communities from all around the world. And we have just been catching up with people, welcoming people from New Zealand and Singapore. Over in the US, we've got Bali represented again today, Indonesia represented. So welcome to you all, and welcome to the traditional custodians of your lands. So our agenda for today, over the last few weeks, we have been talking about real topics around coaching in the workplace. And we've had these really great discussions about what we're hearing in the workplace around coaching, and what do we do about this and what do we do about that. And just yesterday, I was doing a leader as coach and team coaching program with a client, and this topic came up again. What do you do with people where they might be underperforming? Can you use coaching when people are underperforming and we need to shift that performance? So I've really enjoyed our conversations over the last few weeks, where we are talking about real topics in coaching in the workplace and how we handle these different topics. So feel free to catch up with them on our blogs. All the recordings are there, and they are topics that you will hear continuously, and we are hearing just like yesterday as well. So we're thinking about what do we do today with people who might be underperforming, where we need to get a shift in performance, and how does coaching work in that regard? So we've got some ideas to share with you. If you are new to the Coaching Cafe, we say every week, welcome. We are all about creating a community, sharing our learned experiences, and having thought-provoking conversations. To the regulars, welcome back. You know that we really appreciate you being here with us, whether that's live or via your favorite streaming service. We encourage you to jump into the chat box, share your thoughts and comments in the chat box, and we will pick those up as we go along. And of course, there's a lot of you who are collecting your free ICF CCEs. And of course, all you need to do is wait to the end of our session today, and we will put that up and you can screenshot. And we always say, keep them somewhere safe, because, you know, in a year's time or at the end of the year, most of the credentials come up at the end of the year. So you want to be finding those CCEs and loading them up with ease. So I just encourage you to keep them somewhere safe, because of course I did that and couldn't find mine. So anyway, let's get into our conversation to today. And as I mentioned, please feel free to jump into the chat box, share your thoughts and comments as we go along. Now, why is this topic so important? Why are we talking about shifting performance? Why are we thinking about coaching and its impact and the ability to do coaching around performance? Well, as I said, just yesterday, the same topic came up in a team coaching workshop. And we go back to the research, which we always enjoy sharing the research with you. And we often go to Gallup.com because they do an enormous amount of research, up-to-date research, which is really great to see as well. And so we like to share that research with you to give you an idea about where people are coming from. And have a look at this research, which just came out last year, actually, excuse me, when they did their global report. The global report said that traditional approaches to performance evaluation are deeply flawed and often do more harm than good. So this was a massive survey that Gallup did just last year, and they found that, for example, only 14% of employees strongly agree that the reviews they receive inspire them to perform better. Only 26% of employees strongly agree that they are accurate, and only a third, 29%, strongly agree that they're fair. Not surprisingly, the result is that performance reviews actually make performance worse about 1 third of the time. And I remember seeing these statistics. I remember discussing them with you, Paula. And part of us was, well, we know that, but part of me is still shocked, even when I read these statistics, that there's only a very small percentage of people that actually think performance reviews or performance evaluations are any good. And actually, the result is that they make performance conversations worse about 1/3 of the time. So Paula, 20 years experience in HR, 20 years of experience in coaching people to do performance conversations and performance evaluations better. What's your reaction to these statistics?
Well, it makes me think that there's a lot of HR people out there doing a lot of work that isn't necessarily contributing to overall performance improvement, which is sad. And I often go back to when we look at performance reviews in regards to what was the purpose of creating the performance reviews, what did we really want to get out of it? And to be honest, there's a lot of times that performance reviews were created so that it could link to performance, it could link to pay increases and bonuses. And unfortunately, if that's where you started from, it's not actually going to give you the result that it will help you determine pay increases and bonuses, but it certainly won't be linked into the people side of looking at and celebrating performance and, if need be, improving performance. So I still think there's a reasonable amount of work that needs to be done from a HR perspective around this and an organisational perspective about really digging into what's the reason we do it and what outcome do we want.
And when you say, just to clarify too, that there's a lot of HR people doing a lot of work, but it's not translating into these statistics. I think, correct me if I'm wrong, what you mean there is there's a lot of coaches and managers and HR people who are doing a lot of coaching to improve people's performance and to improve the performance management systems and to improve performance evaluation. But there seems to be still a bit of a gap between all the wonderful work that's happening and what employees are experiencing. So there seems to be some sort of disconnect there when you see these global surveys. Not to say that we're not doing great work in managing and coaching, and HR people are doing wonderful work, but there still seems to be this disconnect.
Correct.
So it's worth really having a think about, and it's worth thinking about us as leaders and as coaches and influencing workplace coaching. What can we do in this regards, and how can we uplift performance? We're not just talking about performance evaluations and the annual performance review. In fact, what we really strongly advocate, and I know everyone on the line, I know all of you on the line would be thinking the same way, particularly those of you that have done our certificate for workplace and business coaching and have seen the work we do in this regards. But we're trying to move away from that annual event, the lack of preparation, the lack of enthusiasm, the unplanned discussions. And in our coaching and our work in the workplaces as leaders, we're trying to move to more regular conversations, dynamic performance plans, team members taking responsibility, breaking down conversations into manageable chunks that encourage communication and trust, and of course, using those practical coaching frameworks. So everything that we're doing when we think about what makes these conversations tricky, what makes us need to shift that performance, it's what we're trying to move towards, dynamic coaching conversations. And I know that's no surprise to anyone listening. And of course, what makes conversations even more tricky is when people are overrating themselves, or they don't care, or there's surprises, or they actually literally have blind spots around this. So we are also thinking about people who we need to be able to have this shift in performance conversation, but they've got blind spots around, they don't even realize that there's an issue. So the more that we can do actually to get coaching going, the more we can do to make sure that we're having regular conversations about performance and our high performance, the better, in our opinion. We've got some great comments jumping in. Diana, thank you for jumping in. She says, great point, Paula. We have seen situations where a manager completes their team's performance reviews without even speaking to the employees. Oh, worst case scenario, isn't it? Yeah, so thank you for sharing that. So a manager's actually completed the team performance reviews or performance conversations without even speaking to their employees. That is a worry. Brett says part of the disconnect could be lack of communication throughout the year. And then we have these conversations in the moment. So it's a surprise, exactly what we've just talked about. And Scott says one reason for the annual review is that before requiring them, people have never received feedback. That's right. So we know these things. People have not received feedback. We're worried about the performance. Not enough has been done during the year, and then we go into this annual performance season or annual performance reviews, and it's a disaster. So we need to be doing it better. And what we're really thinking about today is shifting performance incrementally. And how do we shift that performance throughout the year? How do we use coaching to do that without going down the slippery slope of a formal HR process? And Paula, I know, I have this image here for those of you that can't see it. What are we pulling rabbits out of a hat here? I think, what are we to do? Are we to pull a rabbit out of the hat? And of course, the answer is going to be no, we're not pulling rabbits out of the hat, but there's a lot that we can do in this regard.
Yeah, and I recall many years ago having a conversation with a manager who told me that for 5 years an employee had not been doing the right thing, and that today was the day that we needed to terminate them. And I know that that's like the end of the line. And I said, so 5 years you've been very happy with this person's performance because you've never spoken to them about it? And they just looked at me and I said, well, how is someone to know that they're not doing well if you've never had a conversation with them? And now we're just going to spring this on them at that point in time.
Yes.
And I also had another conversation this week with someone about underperformance. And I said, really, there's many reasons for underperformance. Until we get to the cause of what is the underperformance, we're never really going to solve it. And we're never going to get to that cause unless we have conversations with that person and are genuinely curious about what's going on in their world and what's creating the underperformance. Because most people don't wake up in the morning and say to themselves, mate, I'm just going to go to work and do the worst job I can possibly think of. It's just not what most people are thinking. But unless we have genuine relationships with our people, unless managers are having conversations over and above the direction of task work, then we're not going to find out what's really going on for someone.
Yes, I absolutely agree. And as Scott's jumped in and said, everything's okay until you're fired. So the biggest issue is exactly what Scott has said, is that because this regular feedback and regular discussions and openness that you're talking about, Paula, is not being had, it is a huge surprise come 5 years later. I know I'm not the only one on the line cringing when I hear that. It's just like, oh, and then, what are we supposed to do? Pull a rabbit out of the hat and make it all, I don't know, go away or yeah, that's a really cringy kind of example you've given us there. Thank you. But it's a real one.
Mm-hmm.
And Guy has jumped in and said underperformance unaddressed becomes by default acceptable performance. So when there's underperformance, it's not addressed. It's what is accepted. And I agree with you, Guy. That is what we hear. That just yesterday in a team coaching workshop, someone said, well, that person's not pulling their weight. But the good thing is because they're a contractor, we can get rid of them. So they're not pulling the weight. Everybody knows about it. But rather than having the conversation, they were trying to have the conversation, but they had this little card up their sleeve going, well, we can get rid of them because they're on a short-term contract. So it's like, oh, the performance starts to get accepted until we can get rid of them. I'm just cringing. Yeah. You've also offered that Paula's point is spot on. Develop genuine relationships with your people, have these genuine conversations, and then we can move on. And everyone's agreeing with you there, Guy, as well. Thanks for jumping in. Jenny, you've offered that the survey results are not surprising as some of the quality of performance feedback conversations by managers are quite poor. And it affects people's motivation, it affects their interest, it affects their engagement in the conversation. So thank you. I'm loving the community. Thank you, everyone, for sharing your knowledge and experience as we go along in this conversation. All right, what to do? Let's talk about the approach that we would use from a coaching point of view. And I know there is great coaches on the line, so very keen to hear your opinions on this. I remember sitting on a plane, actually going over to Perth, Paula, last time I was heading over to WA, 4 hours on a plane. And I just sat with a blank piece of paper, thinking about the issues we have around performance, but what do we really want? And all of a sudden, I started to come up with these reframes. And I wasn't just thinking about people in the workplace that we might be coaching as leaders and managers. I was actually thinking about my own performance. And I started to think about areas where I might have felt in my role I wasn't achieving exactly what I wanted to achieve. So could you say that I'm underperforming? Well, I was just thinking about this. I want to lift my performance in certain areas, be it in my personal life or in my professional life. And I started to get this idea about I think one of the issues we have is when we talk about underperformance, someone is underperforming, then that is all we track for. We track for the underperformance. We're discussing underperformance. We're going to focus on the underperformance. We're going to put plans in place because of the underperformance. And you can hear even in my language, even if you can't see me, I'm being dragged down by that conversation already. So if we go into a conversation and we open up that conversation saying, let's talk about underperformance, let's talk about what your performance has been like and where you're not performing, that is not an engaging conversation. We can guarantee they're walking out, not walking in, not feeling engaged and motivated, as Jenny has described, and they are walking out feeling even worse. So as Scott says, well said, Natalie, whatever word we use to describe shapes our engagement with people. And then what happened for me is I just crossed it out. I went, let's not talk about underperformance. And as Guy has said here, trust in the relationship is key to be able to have the conversation safely as well. So if we're opening up the conversation on a negative, have we got trust? Have we? Is an open conversation that allows people to think, to have that conversation safely? I agree with you there, Guy, definitely. So I started to think about shifting. How do we shift performance? We know what the expectations and the goals are and where we need people to be, and we know what their reality is, where they are now. And so I started thinking about this shift in performance that we need. And then I started to think about the other words and the reframes on this. So rather than thinking about underperformance, I crossed that out and we started to think about shift. Now, as I've shared this with the alumni like you on the line, and we've talked about it more and more and more, I love these great words and the reframes that come out of it. So rather than talking about underperformance, we're talking about how do we shift performance? How do we lift performance? How do we raise performance? How do we change performance? And the model we have here is, this is where we need to be. This is what's happening at the moment. So how do we change that? How do we raise the performance? How do we lift performance? What options do we have? What's the plan around that? When are we going to do it? How are we going to do it? So we're using the GROW model here. Good on the good old GROW model. Let's bring it out and let's use it. And think about, and we're coaching the person around a lift, a change in performance, and what they can do and what options they have and what they will do and when they will do it and the action plan that comes out of it. And all of a sudden, when we start talking about, it is like a rabbit out of a hat. I've had lots and lots of people we've shared these ideas with who have gone into conversations and done this. And what happens actually is exactly what Guy and Scott and Jenny are talking about. It shifts the perspective from the manager and the coach's perspective the manager's perspective to think, I'm not having an underperformance conversation. I'm having a change in performance conversation. I'm having a lift in performance conversation. I'm having a shift. And that's what we're looking for, the shift, the lift, the raise, the change. And actually the people that we've shared this with over the years have gone, that actually feels a lot better. That's a conversation I can have. And that sets up the conversation for success from the outset. Paula, I can see you nodding, and I know a lot of people that will be listening will be nodding. So yeah, feel free to jump in. What are you thinking?
Yeah, because I'm thinking, when in any coaching session that we have, when we look at the goal section, we're always looking for the goal section to be described in a positive manner. So why wouldn't we expect that in a conversation around performance? And it's a small thing that because it also says to the person, I think you can, right? I think we can work together, and that we can, through this conversation, you can develop a pathway forward, as opposed to, which often happens, I don't like to say, but it does, it feels like a manager is forcing a conversation and a way that you're going to do something onto that person because they're so it's I'm going to do this performance improvement on you, rather than let's have a look at how you can shift the performance in a positive way, rather than I'm having a conversation being done to me.
Yes, because that directing and telling and the manager writing up the plan, because that's what we often see as well. The manager is writing the plan, writing out the actions, and the employee has to agree to that. And of course, when nothing happens, they say, well, I never agreed to it, but you signed it. Yeah, but I never agreed to it. So all of those messy, complicated conversations come out as well. And so we're trying to think about, we need to do this differently. And the reality is one of the interesting things, thumbs up are coming, that's really nice. And Wanda says you're going to try that approach and try to use it. So I look forward to hearing, next week how you go, if you do it between now and when we catch up. The reality is interesting here as well, because in a safe, psychologically safe conversation, we can talk about what reality is based on where we need you to be and what we're expecting. Then let's talk about what your reality is, which is what you talked about earlier, Paula. Let's get under the surface and understand what's happening for you. And even if they are overrating themselves or they don't see it, it gives me as the manager, as the coach, the opportunity to describe the reality as I see it. So you are talking about how you're working and how hard you're working, and I can give a perspective as well. And so the realities and the perceptions might not be the same, but at least it opens up the opportunity for conversation. And we can say things like, I need to share with you that that's not what we're experiencing, or that's not what I'm seeing, or I need to share with you that perhaps I haven't seen something that you've been doing, and that needs to be taken into account. So it's kind of putting on the table this with an open, psychologically safe, as you said there, Scott, the conversation, so that then we can talk about where we need to move to as well. So psychological, what did each person actually agree to? So in a psychologically safe contract, what did we actually agree to that we were aiming towards? So maybe the goals weren't as clear, but now that we're making those goals clearer, now that we're making the expectations clearer, let's talk about how you shift, raise, and change. So managers can take responsibility for actually maybe the expectations and the goals and the conversations never happened. So how can we, but now that we're having those, let's talk about a shift, a lift, a raise. What options do we have, etc., etc. Yeah. Diana says incremental feedback is totally underestimated. I agree with you. I think even when you have a very high performing team, I think what happens is, even when you have a very high performing team, or you're thinking about it for yourself, it gets tricky. It gets difficult sometimes to tell your team members, actually, can we tighten this up, or got some feedback for you? But the more we do it, the more the more open and honest and genuine that we are in having those conversations, the better. Thumbs up coming from you, Robin. Thank you. Yeah, Scott says, I'm curious why less than 30% of employees agree with their reviews and what employees do to get better information, since it seems to be quite challenging to have the conversations. Yes. So it comes back to, Scott, us all taking responsibility for our performance conversations and our performance reviews and checking in and requesting feedback. I think a lot of people don't do that. It's a bit of a case of, if I don't hear anything from my boss, then I must be okay, like we talked about before. And then it's the bosses, the managers not having the conversations as well. It's something we can really, really focus on as coaches and make a difference here. Yeah. So as we said, getting the options being generated from the employee, I don't know if this sounds harsh to you, Paula. You can jump in, assuming we all have to take responsibility for our roles. So in some ways, I sometimes think, well, it's the employee's performance. If they're not meeting their expectations, then it's up to them to start thinking about what they can do and what options they have to start moving towards those expectations. And then, of course, it's up to the manager to coach them and to create that safe environment that we've been talking about. It's a dual responsibility here. And I think that's what's needed as well. It's your performance. It's you that we're talking about that needs to lift, shift, and raise. How can I, as your manager, as your boss, support you to be where you need to be? So what role do I have to play in it? How can I support you? But it's a partnering again. In my mind, it's going back to our ICF core competencies around partnering. I'm partnering with you to help you achieve what you need to achieve.
Yeah, and I think one of the key things here is, if no one has ever asked an employee how they think they can do something, then they're not going to actually know that they can have input here. And I think it's about really building that environment where you are looking at it from a dual perspective. And I always say to my managers, it's not your job to improve the performance, because only the individual can do that. And I love that you use the word support there, because often what I hear managers say in meetings is, oh, well, I'll do this for you, and then you do this, then you do this. But so the manager's taking ownership for the performance, for their performance. So I really love the idea that it's, how do I support you in order to meet your goals? How do I support you in developing in the areas that you would like to develop? And it is the manager's role there is as a support role. It is to find and work with that person to figure out what's their way forward. But I do not underestimate that there's people out there who've never been asked some of these questions before, and that in the first instance, they're probably not going to, they're going to not be sure of what to say because they've never been asked the questions.
Yeah, I agree with you. Yeah. And what's interesting, and I pick up on Scott's comment here too, is what this means though, in our conversations here, is that anyone in the system, anyone across the levels of hierarchy and management and employee, etc., they can all be responsible for improving what happens. We can be responsible, each of us listening can be responsible for asking for feedback, for doing things better, etc., etc. So anyone in the system can start to take steps to actually improve things. Jenny says, what if the manager is not approaching these conversations skillfully and not taking in the feedback, and the trust has been eroded already for the staff to have further conversations and feedback? What upward coaching strategy is recommended in this type of dynamic? Thank you, Jenny. Well, I think we can use this model that we're showing you in that situation. And I would start the conversation about thinking about, what are we trying to achieve? Go back to that. What's our purpose? What's our intent? What's our higher purpose around, I want to have this conversation. I want to open up this conversation so that we can increase our performance, so that we can work together, so that we can partner. We may not have done this as well as we could have in the past. Is that something you'd be open to? So if they haven't approached the conversation skillfully in the past, then I would say, I don't think in the past we've approached that conversation as skillfully or the best way. What I'm trying to achieve is this: can we be open to having new conversations? And it's I'm just rolling these ideas off the top of my tongue, and I know when we actually go to implement, this is going to be difficult. So let's acknowledge that if something hasn't been quite right in the past, that we need to acknowledge that, think about what we want and where we want to be, and then we can start moving towards that as well. How do we get a shift, lift, and raise? So the reality is we haven't done it very well in the past, and we want to move towards a better way of doing things. And that's a really good conversation to have. Yeah. Other comments coming back. We're really on fire today. These conversations that need to be happening on so Guy says, thank you for jumping with your experience here as well, Guy. These are conversations that need to be happening on a weekly basis so that we don't get to a stage where we're having to deal with underperformance. I agree with you. And Jenny says this is more for general performance conversations, not just for an underperformance conversation. And thank you, Jenny. I think that is a great way to actually summarize. We are talking about performance. We all have performance. We all have performance levels we're trying to achieve. So we might not be underperforming, but we might need to get a bit of a shift, a lift, and a raise in an area. And that's great. We've talked about it as a team ourselves this week. How can we're doing continuous improvement, and how can we shift and change what we're doing around that, and how we capture continuous improvement. And Paul has gone and implemented a new system for us, and here we are. We've uplifted our performance in that area, in capturing continuous improvement. So great. Performance reviews are common. The conversation is energizing us. So yeah, thank you, Scott. I'm glad that you feel energized. And as I said, a really nice way to finish up actually in Jenny's summary there, that these are for conversations across the board. Not just underperformance conversations. So thank you. Those of you that have done our Cert 4, we encourage you to go back to the needs analysis model. You can use it for performance conversations and having quality questions there about what's going well, where we're experiencing challenges, etc. So go back to module 2, I think, have a look there, bring out your needs analysis and use those questions for your performance conversations as well. Well, there you go. What a great conversation. We have absolutely gone for it. I look forward to hearing your feedback and what you think about using the shift, lift and raise. The big reframe there is really important. I remember, as I said, being on the plane and going, we need to reframe this. And I remember like that visceral response I had when I crossed out that word and said, it's not about this. And then, so anyway, hopefully, thanks, MJ. You've said a solid presentation, actionable, realistic suggestions. Let's go out and use them. Thank you, everyone. We've got our Cert 4 coming up. We've got new October dates. These are the ones that we're offering you because November is await listed. We've got our diploma, lots going on, mentoring, mediation, etc. So feel free to tap into us with all of those services as you need them for yourself. Or for your team members as well. And yes, thank you for asking. We do these, we do performance conversations, and the conversation we're having now in a bigger workshop if you need it as well. You can talk to us about that. Anyway, for now, we say thank you for joining us. We love catching up with you every Friday. Enjoy your coaching, and we look forward to catching up with you at our next coaching conversation.